Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Now, today's video, I'm going to be going over how the world truly works behind the scenes. Now, we've experienced a lot of events that have been going on within this world right now. We've experienced, the ICE police situation that's been going on, the pandemic, the war between Israel, the U.S., and Iran, police brutality, all these different things. I can keep going on and on and on and on. We were experiencing these things and these events and these tragic events, and we're just oblivious to it. We're oblivious to it all, right? The powers that be, these things are orchestrated and planned by them. And for what exactly? For world domination, world control, and wealth and power. Now, I have a more detailed explanation of this topic. I'll leave that link down in the description if you guys want to check that out. It's one of my PowerPoint presentations. Now, for me personally, I really don't dibble and dabble into politics. I don't talk about it as much, but my spirit has led me to want to talk about it, so here I am. All right. And before I start this video, these are the two books that I'm going to be using as references on what I'm talking about. Right, so we have The Principles for Dealing with the Changing World Order, Why Nations Succeed and Fail by Ray Dalio, and Rule by Secrecy by Jim Marrs. So I'll be using these books to back my claims up. So if you want to, check these books out, I highly recommend it. All right. So let's go ahead and get started. This is probably gonna be a long video, so get your popcorn out. This is probably gonna be a long video because I'm about to expose some shit. All right, so let's get into it. This is how the world basically works, okay? So while humanity's improvements and innovations are evolutionary, they don't cause big shifts in who has wealth and power. Now, notice that I have the emphasis on big shifts, okay? So we could say that improvements like technological improvements in healthcare and education and all these sorts of different things, economic prosperity. These things are very beneficial for humanity, right? It's an upward trend, but we go through cycles. But we're drastically improving from what we've been experiencing, what we've had within the last 20, 30, 40 years. So these are big improvements and these are big advancements for humanity, but notice the emphasis on big shifts. They don't cause big shifts in who has wealth and power. The shifts come from revolutions and wars, which are driven by cycles. So like revolutions, wars, chaos, pandemics, diseases, sicknesses, all these different things. These are the things that cause the big tectonic plate shifts within the world, right? Because the powers that be, they don't care about, the evolution of humanity and we need to uplift humanity and bring humanity to a golden age and all these different things. They don't care about any of that shit. They don't. I'm just being honest, they don't. What they really care about is, the drastic events, the drastic changes, the wars, all these different chaotic events. These are the things that are the movers and shakers of the world. Because on a spiritual level, when you look at it from a spiritual level, the demiurges, the egregores, the archons, the demonic forces, they feed off of this energy. They feed off of this loose energy, right? From the fear of the citizens, the destruction, the wars, the killing, the violence. They feed off of this energy. That's what they need to keep this matrix going, right? So love and peace is not going to keep this matrix going. And the job of the elites, the powers that be, whatever you want to call them, the demiurges, the egregores, they need to keep this system going. If the system is not going, they can't survive. They cannot exist, right? So that is their job, to bring forth these, these scripts, these plays, these planned events. Because all this world is nothing but a stage. It's nothing but an illusion. It's nothing but plays and pre-planned events, right? We are so oblivious to it, but that's why I'm making this video, to inform you guys on what is really going on behind the scenes, behind the veil, behind the world. All right? So these shifts come from revolutions and wars, which are driven by cycles. Now, let's get into this. So I have this line graph, right? So we have the New Order. You ever heard of the New World Order? When, big changes and, certain leaders are coming in, new leaders are coming in to make certain changes within the world and things of that nature, to implement certain policies and laws and all these different things. So the New World Order is established. So the last New World Order was established by the U.S. after World War II, right around 1945. That's when the U.S. started to become the big dominant power within the world. All right. So then we have the rise, right? Then we have the top, the decline, and then that's when a new order comes into play, right? So first we have the rise, right? So this is from the New World Order book that I mentioned earlier. So we have the rise. The rise is the prosperous period of building that comes after a new order. It is when the country is fundamentally strong because there are A, relatively low levels of indebtedness, B, relatively small wealth, values, and political gaps between the people. C, people working effectively together to produce prosperity. D, good education and infrastructure. E, strong and capable leadership. And F, a peaceful world order that is guided by one or more dominant world powers. Which leads to, we got the top. This period is characterized by excesses in the form of A, high levels of indebtedness. B, large wealth, values, and political gaps. C, declining education and infrastructure. D, conflicts between different classes of people within countries, like the rich and the poor. And E, struggling between countries as overextended empires are challenged by emergent rivals, the US and China, for example, which leads to, there we got the decline, right? So the decline, this is the painful period of fighting and restructuring that leads to great conflicts and great changes in the establishment of new internal and external orders. It is the stage for the next new order in a new period of prosperous building, right? So I point out the U.S. is now in relative decline while the Chinese is rising, while China is rising, right? So the U.S. is on its decline, so it's not going to be, the same dominant power as it once was in the past. We see China on the come up with its new technological advances and new economic installations and things of that nature. Now, so we covered, the new order, the rise, the top, the decline, and the new order. Let me get more specific with the top, because this is the more, this is the more important part when it comes to the new world order cycle. So we got the top. So in the top phase, the country sustains the successes that fueled its rise, but embedded in the rewards of the successes of the seeds of decline, right? So on the top, it leads to the decline. As you all know, within the Kemetic principles, within the law of rhythm, everything must come up, and that means everything must come down, right? Over time, obligations pile up, breaking down the self-reinforcing circumstances that fuel the rise, right? So as people in the country, which is now rich and powerful, like the U.S., for example, earn more, that makes them more expensive and less competitive, right? Relative to people in other countries who are willing to work for less. So at the time, people from other countries naturally copy the methods and technologies of the leading power, which further reduces the leading country's competitiveness, okay? Also, as people in the leading country become richer, they tend to not work as hard. They enjoy more leisure, pursue the finer and less productive things in life, and at the extreme become decadent, right? Values change from generation to generation during the rise to the top, from those who had to fight to achieve wealth and power to those who inherited it, right? The new generation is less less battle hardened, steeped in luxuries and accustomed to the easy life, which makes them more vulnerable to challenges. You may hear, from older people, from other older people, from your parents or your grandparents saying, the today's generation is not the same. They're not the same when it comes to like mental health and dealing with certain crises and certain things of that nature. You ever hear older people say that about the new generation, especially the Gen Z generation? So additionally, as people get used to doing well, they increasingly bet on the good times continuing and borrow money to do that, which leads to financial bubbles. Within capitalist systems, financial gains come unevenly, so the wealth gap grows. Wealth gaps are self-reinforcing because the rich people use their greater resources to expand their powers. Right? This is where the division between the rich and the poor come in, right? They also influence the political system to their advantage and give greater privileges to their children, like better education, causing the gaps in values, politics, and opportunity to develop between the rich haves and the poor have-nots. Those who are less well off feel the system is unfair, so resentment grows, right? This is where the tension comes in. So this is where the part where they're blaming the government and the elites, for the unequalness between the haves and the have-nots. So as long as the living standards of most people are still rising, these gaps and resentments don't boil over into conflict, right? And also having a reserve currency gives it the exporting privilege, right? Because the U.S. is the leading reserve currency all over the world, so that gives them the power to have to borrow money from other countries and the spending power as well. So inevitably, the country begins borrowing excessively, which contributes to the country building of large debts with foreign leaders. While this boosts spending power over the short term, it weakens the country's financial health and weakens the currency over the long term. In other words, when borrowing and spending are strong, the empire appears very strong, but its finances are in fact being weakened because the borrowing sustains the country's power beyond its fundamentals by financing both domestic overconsumption and international military conflicts required to maintain the empire. So the richer countries get into debt by borrowing from poorer countries that save more. So let's look at the internal decline, right? So the decline phase typically comes from internal economic weakness, together with internal fighting, or from costly external fighting, or both. Typically, the country's decline comes gradually and then suddenly, right? So internally, when debts become very large and there is an economic downturn and the empire can no longer borrow the money necessary to repay its debts, this creates great domestic hardships and forces the country to choose between defaulting on its debts and printing a lot of new money. The country nearly always chooses to print a lot of new money, at first gradually, and then eventually massively. This devalues the currency and raises inflation. Just like with the pandemic, right? The government had to print a whole bunch of money because of the pandemic. And because these wars also, especially when the U.S. is involved with certain wars that are going on within other regions, a lot of money is being printed, a lot of money is being made, right? This creates this inflation that we have, this problem of inflation that we have within this country. That's why this country owes trillions and trillions of dollars. Typically at those times when the government has problems funding itself at the same time as there are bad financial and economic conditions and large wealth values and political gaps, there are great increases in internal conflict between the rich and the poor and different ethnic, religious, and racial groups. This leads to political extremism that shows up as populism of the left and of the right. Those of the left seek to redistribute the wealth, while those of the right seek to maintain the wealth in the hands of the rich. This is the anti-capitalist phase, when capitalism capitalists and the elites in general are blamed for the problems. Typically, during such times, taxes on the rich rise, and when the rich fear their wealth and well being will be taken away, they move to places, assets, and currencies they feel safer in. These outflows reduce the country's tax revenue, which leads to a classic self reinforcing hollowing out process. Right? When the flight of wealth gets bad enough, the country outlaws it. Oh, scratch that. These turbulent conditions undermine productivity, which shrinks the economic pie and causes more conflict about how to divide the shrinking resources. Populist leaders emerge from both sides and pledge to take control and bring about order. So you see Donald Trump. Donald Trump is considered a populist leader, right? Who, gives off the illusion that he's going to resolve these certain problems, these economic crises, right? If you see the person on TV, if you like a leader or a certain public figure, it's an illusion, right? The real people who are making the major decisions within the world, they are anonymous. You can't see them, right? So they give you that illusion of a fake deity or a fake God or a fake leader, such as Donald Trump, right? Many people are, they get upset. They might get upset complaining about Donald Trump saying this, Donald Trump doing that. Donald Trump is just playing his part in this matrix, right? Donald Trump is a puppet. He's a character. He's just playing his role. He's playing his part within this play, right? So that's why I don't even take Donald Trump seriously. Like, a lot of people do, and they get riled up about it, and they let Donald Trump control their emotions and things of that nature. Well, Donald Trump is just really playing his part, right? Donald Trump has no ultimate power. They have zero power in anything, right? The people who have the real power are the people in government, the people that are in secret societies, right? Those are the people who are making the real dramatic changes within the world, right? That's when democracy is most challenged, because it fails to control the anarchy, and because the move to a strong populist leader who will bring order to the chaos is most likely the illusion. As conflict within the country escalates, it leads to some form of revolution or civil war to redistribute wealth and force the big changes. This can be peaceful and maintain the existing internal order, but it's more often violent and changes the order, right? So I don't believe we've seen a major civil war yet within this country, but there's a possibility that could be like a peaceful revolution, or it could turn deadly, or it could turn into violence. But we'll see when the time comes. For example, the Roosevelt Revolution to redistribute wealth was relatively peaceful, while the revolutions that changed the domestic orders in Germany, Japan, Spain, Russia, and China, which also happened in the 1930s for the same reasons, were much more violent. Okay? So it's only when the forces that produce internal disorder and instability align with an external challenge that the entire world order can change. All right? So let's get into, I explained a little bit on the internal orders and disorders. Now let's be more specific when it comes to the external, right? Stuff that's happening outside of our country, around the world, right? So externally, when there is a rising great power that is capable of challenging the existing great power in existing world order, there is a rising risk of great international conflict, especially if there is internal conflict going on within the existing great power. So now you see, the things that are happening between China and America, right? America is the existing great power, and China's on the come up. It is the upcoming rising power, right? That's why you see, these fake trade wars that are going on between America and China, right? America imposing tariffs, imposing restrictions on U.S. goods going to China, and China retaliating to doing the same thing, right? So we're seeing this battle between the U.S. and China right now. Typically, the rising international opponent will seek to exploit this domestic weakness. This is especially risky if the rising international power has built up a comparable military, right? China's doing that as well. It has a a growing and developing military. Defending oneself against foreign rivals requires great military spending. Scratch that. Since there is no viable system for peacefully adjudicating international disputes, these conflicts are typically resolved through tests of power, right? Poor economic conditions cause more fighting for wealth and power, which inevitably leads to some kind of war, okay? Wars are terribly costly. You know, they cause these wars that are going on within the world, they cost a lot of money. But at the same time, they produce the necessary tectonic shifts that realign the world order to the new reality of wealth and power, right? So when all these forces line up, indebtedness, civil war / revolution at home, war abroad, the Israel, Iran, the U.S. war. Before that, it was Israel and Palestine. Before that, it was Ukraine and Russia and all these different wars abroad. And a loss of faith in the currency, right? The U.S. dollar is decreasing, right? People have no faith in the U.S. dollar no more. And, you know, inflation is rising and all these sorts of different things. So we're losing faith in the world currency, which is the U.S. dollar. The change in the world order is typically at hand. So like I stated, when there is indebtedness, civil war, revolution, and war abroad, a new world order is coming. All right, so this is basically how the world operates. This is basically how the world is orchestrated, right? The powers that be, this is a chess game to them, right? Every piece that they move, every decision that they make leads to something greater, leads to something more destructive, leads to something more diabolical, which is world domination and possibly a one world government, right? So most of us, we don't think long term. We only think short term. We only think about our next paycheck coming in on a Friday, whatever day. We think about, you know, our bills that we gotta pay. We gotta think about, how am I gonna feed myself? How am I gonna feed my kids? You know, the next concert that we gotta go to. You know, we're just in survival mode, and then at the same time, we're just focusing on, menial things, right? But the powers that be, these these leaders, right? The leaders of these institutions and these companies and countries, they make certain decisions and they think long term. Most of these folks, they think 400, 500, 1,000 years from now. They make certain decisions, they make certain chess moves to facilitate and to formulate things that are coming, that are bound to happen, that are bound to come within a 500, 1,000 year period, right? We as individuals, we just think on a short term basis, right? This is how these people think. This is how these people in higher powers think and operate, right? So, like I said, different innovations, technological improvements, education improvements, all these different things, they're very good for humanity and they're very good for people, but they are not the real movers and shakers of the world. Like I said, this is not what keeps the matrix going, right? These wars and these diabolical plans and decisions, these are the real makers and movers of the world, the shapeshifters of the world, right? So I'm going to be using World War II, events such as World War II and 9/11 as examples. So let's start off with World War II, for example, right? We all know World War II was, a very catastrophic event that has changed history over the course of time, right? But World War II was also orchestrated. World War II was also orchestrated behind the scenes that we don't know about. A lot of people don't know about, right? These wars are fake. They're manufactured. They're pre-planned. They're already put in place, right? And the presidents have no power whatsoever. And I'm gonna show you why, and I'm gonna tell you why, right? So, on the other side of the world, matters were coming to a head with the Japanese Empire. Like Britain, this island nation was totally dependent on imports for survival and with the economic depression of the late 1930s, the country was in desperate straits, right? So Japan, during the next few years, Japanese forces took ever larger portions of China, weakened by civil war between Chiang Kai-shek's nationalists and the communists. So like I said in the beginning, right, when a country is at its lowest, when the country is at its weakest point, other countries try to take advantage of that. And that's what the Japanese were doing to China during the 1930s, okay? So with Britain busy fighting Hitler in 1940, it was clear that the United States was the only power capable of stopping Japanese expansion in the Pacific, right? Animosity between the two nations intensified when Japan was forced to seize further resources in China due to an ever-tightening American embargo, which deprived the home island of vital material. So in September 1940, Japan became partners with Germany and Italy in the Tripartite Act, not sure how you say that word, which pledged mutual assistance should the United States enter the war, right? So President Franklin D. Roosevelt reacted by halting Japanese importation of American petroleum, which had provided more than 90% of Japan's needs, right? So you see within the Chinese and the American trade wars, right, when President Trump imported certain restrictions on United States goods or United States imports to China, that is their decision to stop the Chinese expansion. So we're all seeing it playing through, right? Just like the U.S. Restricted petroleum to go into Japan, like in today's times, the U.S. is doing the same thing with its goods going to China to stop Chinese expansion, just like the U.S. during this time was trying to stop Japanese expansion. So it's all a scripted play that's been going on for centuries. Okay. On July 2nd, 1941, Japan entered Indochina, the nearest alternative source of fuel, right? President Roosevelt retaliated by freezing all Japanese assets in the United States. It was clear at the highest levels that war between Japan and the United States was inevitable. This fact was not lost on Roosevelt, who had campaigned for a third term in office in 1940 by pledging to keep America out of the European War. However, planning for war was already underway, at least within the secretive Council on Foreign Relations. Like I just stated, the president has no ultimate power, right? Just like, within the 9/11 situations when the U.S. was going to go to war with Iraq, because the president of Iraq during that time, Saddam Hussein, they believed, they quoted and they said that he had access to nuclear weapons, but it turns out he didn't have any nuclear weapons in his possession, right? And America was advocating for us to not go to war with Iraq because Iraq had nothing to do with the war, but they went to war with Iraq anyway for their own agenda, just like with the Vietnam War, right? The Americans, they advocated for us to not go through the Vietnam War, but we did anyway, right? So it's all in the power of these secret societies like the Council for Foreign Relations. They are a secret society. They're one of the many secret societies that run our world. Okay? So in quote, CFR members were interested in exploiting the Second World War as they had the first as a justification for world government, asserted Perloff. The globalists hoped to use the Axis threat to force the U.S. and England into a permanent Atlantic alliance, an intermediate step towards world government. But throughout 1941, even after Hitler invaded Russia that summer, the American public stubbornly maintained a position of non-interference toward the war. Okay? A 1940 Gallup poll showed 83% of the public was against intervention. A good pretext was needed to gain support from an intransigent public, right? This is where the decisions within the higher ups start to come in, right? The public, the U.S. citizens, the American people, they didn't want to interfere in this war because we had nothing to do with it. But this is where the secret societies come into play. Controversy has raged for years over the question of Roosevelt's foreknowledge of the December 7th, 1941 attack on Pearl Harbor. While incontestable proof remains elusive, the accumulation of available information has now caused wide acceptance of the idea that the devastating attack was encouraged and tolerated in an effort to galvanize public support for America's participation in the war. Right? So they do these things and they orchestrate these events and plan these things out to persuade the American people for us to go to war. Okay? So on November 25th, 1941, Secretary of War Henry Stimson had a conversation with Roosevelt, after which he wrote in his diary, the question was how we should maneuver them into the position of firing the first shot without too much danger to ourselves. It was desirable to make sure the Japanese be the ones to do this so that there should remain no doubt in anyone's mind as to who were the aggressors. The answer to this dilemma came within 24 hours. The most damning evidence yet of Roosevelt's foreknowledge of an attack came from the 1948 interrogation of Germany's Gestapo chief Heinrich Müller in a 1995 book by Gregory Douglas based on previously secret files. Mueller stated that on November 26, 1941, the Germans in Holland had intercepted a private transatlantic telephone conversation between Roosevelt and British Prime Minister Churchill. Right, so this is the conversation that's going on between them. Churchill informed Roosevelt of the movements of the missing Japanese fleet and stated, I can assure you that their goal is this is where the conversation starts to break, fleet in Hawaii at Pearl Harbor. This is monstrous, exclaimed Roosevelt. Can you tell me, conversation breaks off again, indicate the nature of your intelligence? Reliable, answered Churchill, who mentioned agents within the Japanese military and foreign service as well as their broken code. All right, so you see how these things play a part. The president has no absolute power. They're just following their role. They're just following their part within this matrix. They're doing whatever they're told. They have zero power in whatever situation is going on, right? The obvious implication is that the Japanese are going to do a Port Arthur on us at Pearl Harbor. Do you concur? Asked Roosevelt. Churchill replied, I do indeed, unless they add an attack on the Panama Canal to this vile business. Okay. Roosevelt then said, I would have to consider the entire problem. And a Japanese attack on us, which would result in war between, and certainly you as well, will certainly fulfill two of the most important requirements of our policy. Roosevelt speaks about absenting himself from the White House on some pretext, adding, what I don't know can't hurt me, and I cannot understand messages at a distance. So addressing the unlikely proposition that U.S. military officers will have knowingly allowed American units to be attacked, Arthur Douglas explained, the warning did not come to Roosevelt from below, but on a parallel level and from a foreign intelligence source, which was far better equipped to decode and translate the Japanese transmission. So you see how all that was organized, transpired, and configured, right? The Japanese bombing of the Pearl Harbor gave the United States an excuse to enter into this war. And now we have came victorious within World War II, and now we have established that new world order, right? And that's how we came to power, and that's how we came to be. So you see how these decisions are being made within the higher ups of the government, the secret societies, and all these other different organizations and individuals. You see how these things transpire, and nothing in this world is real. Nothing that you see on the television is real. Tell eye vision, tell eyes to the vision. See what I'm saying? So let's move on to my other example, which is 9/11. Now I know 9/11 is a touchy subject. You know, many lives were lost during the events of 9/11, and I still, send my condolences to the people who have, may have lost loved ones or any of that sort within the 9/11 tragedy. But some people, including myself, believe that 9/11 was orchestrated and planned as well, is scripted as well, right? So, many people, they tend to get upset when people talk about, conspiracy theories in regards to certain tragic events, but, people deserve to know the truth, right? Everything just because it sounds politically correct doesn't mean that it's true, right? So we tend to believe that 9/11 was strictly or solely about terrorists, the terrorist organizations such as Al Qaeda, attacking the U.S. because of oil or some natural resource or something like that. But I believe it has more to do with that, right? They say that it's over, it could be over a certain natural resource, or it could be over something millennial or something small such as that, but it tends to be something bigger behind the scenes. So I was watching this documentary on Netflix, 9/11 and the War on Terror, right? It's crazy how, now that I think about it, it's crazy how all these things came together and how I'm putting the pieces together, because before then, 9/11 wasn't even on my mind, but then I just thought of 9/11. 9/11 came in my head, so I ended up watching the 9/11 documentary on Netflix. So as I was watching this documentary, it explained everything that happened, even back during, at the end of 1989, right? So everything was just orchestrated and planned out, for years to come. And then I didn't even know the World Trade Center was attacked in 1993. They said the World Trade Center was attacked by another terrorist group back in 1993. So it explained, how the people that hijacked the plane, right? They all, had meetings outside the country. It was just this orchestrated plan. They had orchestrated these meetings, the techniques, the training, and all these different things, and they end up making their way to America, right? Taking flight lessons and setting up meetings within the country. Just trying to orchestrate and plan out this terrorist attack, right? And then you realize there was just so many breaches within the U.S. intelligence, right? These two individuals, these two terrorist groups, they end up sending their information to the CIA, the headquarters of the CIA, and the CIA just completely brushed it off, and they completely ignored it. And I wonder why, right? But many people say, it can happen, things, breaching of the intelligence and breaching of the country, these things can happen. But it was just happening all too often. It was just too many missing pieces that was going on, right? So after it had started, the Bush administration approved this thing called Project Stellar Wind, right? And basically Stellar Wind is this unwarranted large sums of metadata collection, right? They were able to collect as much data as they can when it came to certain phone calls, certain email, people sending emails, and the gathering of information from the internet. It was a large metadata collection, right? So basically you can, the government was able to lock down on people's private phone calls, people's private emails, and things of that nature, right? So based on what happened within America, based on what happened within the country with Al Qaeda, right, the public started becoming fearful. They became fearful of their lives and fearful of, something like this happening again, right? So after this tragedy, the government had to utilize this tragedy to implement this project called Stellar Wind that was approved by the Bush administration. And these things called like the Democrat, Republican, Bush administration, Obama administration, all these different things, they're all in the same thing. They're all working together. There's no such thing as a Democrat, Republican, the Bush administration. They're all on the same team, working on the same team, right? So the Bush administration ended up approving this stellar wind protocol, but it ended up not lasting for a very long time. It only lasted for like a few years, I believe. But that's what I'm telling you. These events, they're orchestrating, they're planned for the government to implement something that we don't even know about. That's pulled over our eyes to blind us from the truth, right? And the reason why they did this is because these other countries aren't a threat to America. These other countries are not a threat to America. You want to know who's the biggest threat to America is? The American people. We, the American people. We, the American citizens, we are the biggest threat to the U.S. government. We are the biggest threat to this country, right? So this violated the Fourth Amendment. This violated our constitutional rights. This is invasion of privacy, right? So they utilize this to gather information about us, to intercept our private phone calls and our private life and our private information, because they know that we are the biggest threat to this country. So, all in all, in this video, right, a lot of people, they're afraid to talk about this. Like I said in the beginning, I'm not the type of person that talks about politics and, conspiracy theories and all these different things, but my spirit has led me to talk about this, and I believe that people need to know the truth, and people need to come to the truth and do more research and come with their own conclusions, right? So, this world, this not only this is physical, we tend to think of things from the physical all the time, but this is a spiritual war. Like I said, the demiurges, the egregors, these evil demonic forces, they feed off of this loose energy. They feed off of this. They feed off of these wars. They feed off of this, violence that we are seeing on a day-to-day basis, these problems that we are facing within this country, right? They feed off of this. And that's what keeps this world going. That's what keeps this matrix going, right? Peace, love, and prosperity, that doesn't keep the matrix going, right? Only violence does. And that's why these elites, these superpowers, these people in positions of power, they do this to keep this going. Right, that's why certain bloodlines, right? Bloodlines play a part in this. That's why I believe we need new leaders within the government. Either we need new leaders, or all of us as a people, all of us as a collective humanity need to come together, right? With all these these divide and conquer tactics, these us fighting against each other. That's what they want. That's what they want us to do. Right, when we're divided and separated, that's why they use religion and Democrat and Republican and all these different things, ideologies and all these sorts of different things. They utilize this to keep us divided, to keep us separated, because we can't change the world if we are separated, if we are divided, and that's why they try to keep it that way. But either we need new leaders, we can implement new leaders, which I doubt is not going to happen, because like I said, bloodlines play a part in it. Marriages are arranged, all these sorts of different things, they play a big part in it, right? And they try to keep it that way. They keep it that way. It's all planned, it's all orchestrated, it's all designed, it's all by design, right? So when we raise the awareness, bring this information up. A lot of people are afraid to bring this type of information up. I'm not the type to talk about this stuff, but I believe it was my birthright, and I believe it's my time, to speak on this, to speak on these, these drastic topics, these drastic events, because people need to learn more about the truth. People need to come to the truth, and people need to learn more about this. Right? The world isn't what it seems. This is a big play. This is a big stage, and we are oblivious to it. We believe everything that we see on the TV. We believe everything that we hear from these public figures, right? But that's not what the case is. So we all need to come together. We all need to, put our differences to the side. We all have our differences as human beings, but it's important for us to put these differences to the side, right? So we can come together and start making changes within this world, right? That's the only way. That's the only way for us to, to stop these things from happening, because there's a very few that rule this world. There's a very few that rule over us within this world, but there are more of us than there are more of them. Right? So when we come together and settle our differences and, try to make this world a better place and try to, overthrow these people that are ruling over us, these 100 or less people that are ruling over us, then we have the capability, we have the power and the manpower and the woman power to make changes within this world, right? So hopefully this video, was very informative. Hopefully, you've, learned a lot from this video. Do some research on the side, do your own research and come up with your own conclusions. And, I wish you the best of, many blessings coming your way, things of that nature, right? So next time, and always remember, all power resides from within, and always keep the faith, because God and the universe is always working for you. Take care, guys, and God bless.